So here we are. All of a sudden, isolation is over and we're returning to our workforce. However, the workforce often looks quite different than what we left it. For one thing, we're looking at a neighborhood of 40 million Americans unemployed. That we have not had this kind of unemployment since the Great Depression. And if your business is still in business, guess what? In many cases, they're cutting back, they're doing more with less, and many of us find ourselves in a tenuous situation where we may not have a job for long. And that's what the Community Reemployment Initiative is all about, is helping you when you find yourself being unemployed. Now, I think the unemployed looks quite different today than it did at some time in the past. If we'd gone a year ago, a year and a half ago, and looked at the unemployment line, those people that were unemployed in many cases had a reason that they were unemployed. They may have job hopped a little bit. They may have struggled with not having enough education, and not that there's anything wrong with that. And that's what the unemployment line is about. But these people that are unemployed, I think, look different. They look like the people that you go to Rotary with. They look like the people that you know from the community, that you may have sat on a board with. And all of a sudden, quite for no reason at all, good people with great careers find themselves unemployed. And guess what? They don't have the job skill. They don't have the job seeking skills that they need. And that's what we're here about. We're helping you get better. Get better resumes, work the LinkedIn better, work with the community better, and find better ways that we can get out there and get you reemployed. That's why I'm so excited to have with us today Kevin Monahan. Now, Kevin Monahan is area director with the SBDC in Jacksonville, Florida. And what we're going to talk about today may be a little bit of a twist. It may take just a minute to get your mind around. But what happens if instead of going out and trying to find a job with someone else, what if this is the time that you decide you're going to start your own business? Now, it seems crazy, right? If the economy is terrible, why would you start your business right now? This is a terrible time to go out there and risk it, right? Because all these businesses are going out of business. But the reality is that if you've thought about it and if the conditions are right, it may not be a terrible idea. Let me bring in my friend Kevin Monahan. Now, Kevin, you and I have been friends for a long time, and I know you've helped hundreds and hundreds of businesses get started, get up, grow, and develop. But is this a really terrible time for somebody to think about starting their own business?
No, not at all. And we have to put it in perspective. There's some people who lost their jobs, but they were actually underemployed, regardless of the economy. And then, the other is, you may be forced to go into business for yourself because you can't find somebody to hire you on. If you do the research, if you have a talent, if you have a skill, and you should do a self-assessment on your skill sets, then this might be the time to go in.
Now, a lot of us have that entrepreneurial moment where we say, my gosh, I'm just tired of working for somebody else, and you want to bust out and go do your own thing. There must be some signposts or some criteria that you would look at and say, if you were advising me, for instance, Daniel, if you have these things, you have a pretty good chance of success. And if you don't have those things, maybe you have a less chance of success. Can you talk about what you might advise me that I need to have in place?
Well, I can give you some generalities and then a few specifics.
Okay.
To start with, you need certain people skills. Even though we're still a little bit isolated and everything else, we're going to have to learn how to network a new way. Okay. It may not always be face-to-face, which was probably the most productive way of doing it. And we're going to have to come up with a new kind of social media interaction to do that. I think depending on the business you go into, you have to learn to be articulate in how you talk and present. And I think you have to be persuasive in one way, shape, or form, certainly to give the potential customer the comfort to trust enough in you to give you a try. Mm-hmm. And so,
I'm sorry.
Examples of that would be, somebody that goes into a completely different business with not the skill sets that they really need for that industry, and it shows. Customers are very wary. And even in this economy, they may even be more wary with the dollar that they're going to spend. So you have to show your competency in order to be successful.
All right, so if I've spent 8 years as a speaking coach and I come to you and I say, Kevin, I've really always wanted to be a baker. I've always wanted to open a restaurant. You might tell me, Daniel, you don't have the background for that, and your chances of success are much less, right?
Yes, and I might make you test yourself by having you do either a feasibility plan, which we call a baby business plan. In other words, is this doable or not? And I would give you an outline to help you do that. Or I may have you do a full-blown plan just to see whether you think you can pull this off or not. And so I'm making you work to prove to yourself that either you can or won't make it in what you're trying to do.
Now, I've seen you advise people before that you sort of have a little bit of overlap. Can you continue to do your current job while starting your side business? And then, like you said, a baby plan so they get some idea of whether or not that can actually be successful. But what if I've been like an... I'm sorry.
I'd rather test the waters than jump right in. Absolutely.
But what if I've been, let's say I've been an accountant, maybe I've got some higher-ups that are doing great, but I've been a good accountant and I've got people that like me, and a lot of my customers, they invite me out to their Christmas parties, and maybe I know them personally, and I think I could, if my business is shut down, maybe I can go and start my own accounting firm, and they will just hire me instead of going through the big firm I used to work for. Is that a pretty good scenario for starting out?
That's a great scenario for starting out. I think I would still put the individual through their paces from a networking point of view and a confidence point of view, because at some point you're going to have to ask for the work.
Yes. You have to be a salesman. That gets into the next point, which is we talked about, is that maybe you're a great baker and maybe you can bake the very best cupcakes in the world. Best. But that's a technical skill. But now you don't run a business by baking cupcakes. You have to run a business by building businesses and run it. You have to be a manager of all of this process. Somebody has to order the flour, and somebody has to do the marketing, and somebody has to go out and network like you were talking about. And you have these other skills that you may not think are critical, but they're going to be critical on day one.
Well, it is critical, and I think it's a lot of people that work for corporate most of their lives that make that mistake, because they tend to only have one role within the organization. Everything else gets taken care of them by somebody else, whether it's customer support or a sales department, or a technical assistance department, whatever it is, quality assurance. All that's behind you in the job that you're doing specifically for that corporation. When you go out on your own, you have to do everything. Or let's put it a better way. Everything has to be done. You don't have to do all of it, but someone's got to take it all on. Because if you keep making cupcakes, they're just going to pile up behind you. And if the phone doesn't ring, you're going to be in trouble pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. So you really do have to understand the business part of the business. So you're not working in the business, baking cupcakes, but you really find yourself in the back room doing the books, planning, ordering, all of that stuff. And if it's not fun for you, it's really easy to leave that aside. An awful lot of people start without any thought about marketing. How do you market yourself? You think it's just going to happen organically, and rarely does somebody organically build their business with marketing. Marketing is a whole different skill set, right?
Yes, and people really pick up on that. Potential customers or clients can really read very quickly whether you really believe in yourself or not. And body language is even part of it. It all comes into play. So, if you have the confidence and if you really have convinced yourself that you are the best possible solution to this customer's problem, then you've got a much better chance of, whispering down a well, hoping someone answers back.
Right. But that's, I guess the point is that a lot of time, if you're a great technician, if you're great at building this thing, or maybe you know more about acoustic guitars than anybody in the world, then you think that that's going to be the skill set that makes you successful, and it is one of them, but it is one of a half a dozen.
Keep in mind that we have to manage the business, and we have to execute like a like a real entrepreneur. I mean, that's the way to do it. I mean, if you in the E-Myth, where they use the example of those three personalities living together, the author, Michael Gerber, asks you to pretend that your business is eventually going to be franchisable. So if you would take that approach, then you would have to map every process that you have in your business. In other words, you'd have to think everything through before you went forward, because that would be part of the franchise model, selling those processes to somebody else that wants to avail themselves of them. So that's the key, that's the secret, and that's the planning that should go into preparing to go out on your own.
So it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I worked in a furniture store when I was in LA. It was great fun. I had a lot of fun. Sales, I just like people. I like to be out on the floor, and I like walking around and working with the customers. Had a blast. And what they did was, I was so good at it that they made me a manager. And guess what? I never was out on the floor anymore. I never met people. I sat at a desk and I did ordering, and I argued with numbers, and I did spreadsheets, and I put in, and it's horrible. Maybe I don't want to do all that. Then should I not think about going into business?
No, because there's a raft of professional people who would be glad to help you out with the parts that you don't like. You either you either hire it or you rent it.
Yeah.
And so, in the rental case, you're getting someone to do the books for you because they have to be done. It's in your best interest to learn how to interpret what the bookkeeper put down, right? So there's a control in there and a process in there. And the same thing would go for payroll. Or maybe you are a technician. Maybe you are great at making something, but you're not a great salesperson. You're going to have to think that through. There are many people who represent more than one kind of company and more than one kind of product in a particular industry, and they know exactly where to go to sell their product. You and I were speaking before about people being hesitant to ask for help, and I think it's absolutely crucial, mostly because I realize how much help there is out there. Going to your local small business development center is a great start, but there are other localized economic development entities that would love to help you as well. So always seek help, always ask for advice, and get yourself a mentor.
So if you had, every business is different. Don't want to hit all of them, but if you started your cupcake shop or you started your bike store, what are the 2 or 3 professionals that you probably want on your team that you ought to think about right from the beginning?
Well, one of the things I'd probably look for is somebody who's retired from the bicycle business, or somebody who was a baker at one time. Who over a cup of coffee would probably have some sage advice for you. Right. I'd also would go to a small business development center and find somebody that has worked with companies like the one I want to go into before. I've worked with many of the same businesses. I've probably worked with at least 6 bicycle shops. I must have some good advice for you. I'd like to think so.
Yeah. So you have that, but you probably have a legal person that you need to ask questions of.
Absolutely. And you have choices there too. You could hire that local accountant, right, to give you accounting advice. Right. But you also have, for legal advice, you could go to LegalZoom, where they're not even in your town, but they give you good legal advice. Or you have the lawyer who's down the street that has started 150 small companies within 5 miles of your building.
Right. And then, of course, the accounting. We've talked about accounting, but also marketing. So many people I've seen really have the idea that if I do a really good job with my shop, that people will just fall out of the woodwork and just come flood my front door. And without marketing, really nothing happens. Right?
Well, when we talk about cash flow, it's a dangerous thing. You could run a beautiful shop, and the customers may have a great experience. And eventually, word of mouth might populate the shop that you have bicycles being repaired in. But if you market, you might be able to accelerate that so that instead of waiting a year, within 4 months, your place is buzzing.
And then I know you talk about the financial discipline of not outgrowing your money supply. And I think you have an example of this, or maybe you have a few examples of this, where you've helped people just constrain their needs so they don't go out and buy $100,000 worth of stuff that they don't necessarily need right now. Can you talk about how that discipline works?
Yes, some of the most successful startups I've had just had a policy between them. It could be two partners, it could be a husband and wife, it could be a lone wolf business owner, but they simply have the discipline not to buy something they don't need or not to buy something they can't afford yet. And we use restaurants as a typical example of that, Daniel, where somebody wants a brand new stove when there are used ones available for a third of the price. They need a preparation table. Well, they buy a brand new one at 3 times the cost of one that they could get from a restaurant that might be either retiring or going out of business for some other reason or whatever. Smart business owners take advantage of those things, and it really pays them back later because they've got cash flow to hold on until their customer base improves.
Now, I think the cookie shop is a good example of that. I think you helped them start the cookie shop with nothing. They were basically working out of their... Tell me about that story, because it seemed like their constraint was really beautiful.
Well, they worked out of their house originally.
Yeah.
And sometimes when somebody's baking in their house, they're afraid they're going to get turned in because some people say it's legal, some isn't. In certain states, they have a cottage law industry where you can sell a certain amount of food from your house, and not worry about it. But they finally decided to make the jump. And so they were getting serious about it. So they came in and we got them involved with a kitchen that shares space. Mm-hmm. And so they baked cookies there. They didn't have a rental location or anything yet, but they started selling to corporations, specialty cookies. And they only bought what they thought they needed and really did somewhat frugal. You could say, someone could criticize them for that, but they were very smart. And eventually they saved up enough money to start doing like Saturday markets and things like that. And they took the money they made from that to lease space. And once they leased space, the company took off.
That's a great example of that. Now, the flip side of that is there's a guy here in town who started his restaurant, and he rented a great location. He had marble tables put in. He had, the place looked fantastic, and he was a great chef, and everybody was really excited about the day he was going to open up. But the day he opened up was also the day he closed because he had outpaced his money supply. He didn't have that deep of pockets, and he spent everything on getting there day one, and then at the end he didn't have any money to run the place for the next 4 months until it was profitable.
Well, there's also this other discipline. We've seen it years and years ago, but it still happens today, and that is you decide to get a brick and mortar location, you sign a lease with a landlord. The landlord gives you 3 months of free rent to entice you to go into their building, and you just fool around and frivol, and you never quite get the place open on time, and suddenly now you're paying a full-blown rent, and you are not even open yet. And it's a very, very dangerous thing to do, and I've seen quite a few businesses have to close out. And it's funny that the signs would say to the normal consumer going by, coming soon, coming real soon, coming next week. Yeah. And then they say open, and 2 weeks later, going out of business sale.
Right. And then you have to, I would imagine, Kevin, that you talk to different businesses, business models with different, because if you're that accountant I was talking about, that accountant might be able to work out of his house or her house. They may not have anything more than a telephone and a computer for a while, and that may be doesn't need cash flow the same way that a restaurant would, because day one you've got to have employees and all like that. So in some ways, if you're talking about starting your own business, and it's a business that can be started with very little cash, you're going to be better off than something that requires, $100,000 right up front.
Well, that's absolutely right. And let me tell you kind of a contrary story to that. And this is a true story of a couple that was walking around as tourists in St. Augustine, Florida. And there's a very quaint area that has wonderful little shops in it. You always wind up buying something to bring home at these stores. And they walked in, and there was this elderly lady behind the counter. She was very nice, and she showed them around, and they bought something. And they walked down the street, and they saw a sign in a window for lease. And they said, we could do this. This would be great. We'll just have a little shop and customers will be coming in all day long and we'll greet everybody and we'll do great. So they did that. And it turns out that that elderly lady who was behind the counter had inherited about $5 million and lost money every year on her gift shop. But they never had the foresight to ask or probe into that situation.
Well, that brings up a good point. In some cases, you may be able to buy somebody else's business. And to a degree, your example is one where it didn't work out. But to a degree, if you do due diligence is what they call it, you may be able, somebody else has got they've got an accounting business, or maybe they've got a place that fixes appliances, an appliance repair place. And if they've got a good book of business, if they've got business and they've got clients coming in, you might be able to buy somebody else's business and have some clients day one. Is that a good idea?
Yes. I mean, Daniel, at the end of the day, there's only three ways to go into business. That's go in from scratch, bootstrap, and do all the work and discovery yourself. Right. Second would be buying an already established operation, and the third is franchising, right? And in that order, you go from the cheapest to the most expensive going through that, right? I mean, there are some very inexpensive franchises, don't get me wrong, but a McDonald's would be a perfect example of you're going to have to put some money up to make money. But buying a business is a situation where you also need a team because you need help doing the analysis. A CPA, for example, would do that. There's people whose principal activity is valuing a business so that you aren't getting charged more than you should be paying. That would be two examples.
But the franchise, if I understand it correctly, the reason you buy a franchise is because they are, in most cases, they want you to be successful. They'll give you every chance in the world to be successful. Yes, you put a lot of money up to get started, but they've sort of figured out all the processes, so you're not, in the case of starting your own business, you may be figuring out every single process. But the franchise,
that's absolutely right. So in franchising, you are correct when you say that what you're really purchasing is the process. So you're buying the videos and the binders that they're providing you that you got during discovery. So you really realize this franchise is either behind me or they don't really care that much. Or really their only business is selling franchising. They don't care as much about the products that they originally made.
Right.
All franchises are different. And there actually are companies that will sit you down, talk to you, interview you, test you, and come up with 3 or 4 franchises that they believe fit your lifestyle and your skill sets the best.
So we think about franchises like McDonald's and things like that, but there are crazy, wonderful, exciting franchises for like tutoring companies. There's a lot of them that we don't ordinarily think of.
That's absolutely true. I think there's something like 500, 600 different franchises out there of all different sizes. I know we think about food, but even consultative services.
So, Kevin, if I came into you and I said, hey, I want to start a business, and I've been an accountant for a while, and now I want to go out on my own and start my business, what is the first thing you would tell me? What do I need before anything else?
Well, the first thing I'd like to know is what your experiences have been. Where have you worked? What have you done? What do you like? What do you dislike? So it's a little bit of Q&A, but it's really more me listening in the opening phase. And then from there, I'm going to give you some guidance on how you could prove to yourself as well as me that this idea really does have merit. And I want you to put something on paper to show both of us that this is feasible.
All right. Now, how do you figure that out? Give me an example of what you might ask me to do.
Well, I'll rattle off 10 for you, okay? I'll give you 10 ideas, Daniel. First is, what is my idea?
Mm-hmm.
Second is, how does the idea make money?
Mm-hmm.
The third is, who is my customer? It's not everybody. Who is my customer, right?
Right.
And then, who's my competition? A lot of people come in and they say, well, we don't have any competition. And I go on Google and I show them how much competition they have, And then after that, what is your message for your idea? How do you get it out to the customer, right? And then where do you put the message? Where do you put the messaging so that your client sees it? What does your client look at it? Not everybody what does your client look like, right?
Right.
Then after that, who's the management team? Is it you? Is it you and a partner?
Mm-hmm.
Is it you and your accountant? Let me know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second is, what are the processes that we're going to bring to the table here? Because we know that everything has to be done. We might as well establish processes now.
Mm-hmm.
And how much money is it going to take? And if we come up with that money, what are our next steps?
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a business plan.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing that you could use to convince an investor
Mm-hmm.
or a bank or even alternative lenders. It's all the same presentation. You have to bring something. You can't just walk in and expect them to say, well, where have you been? That sounds great.
Talk about a little bit about where people get their money. Where do most people get their money when they start their business?
Well, there's a number of different places. Generally, they are convincing, the people who get money, Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
are people who are convincing enough so that somebody wants to invest in them. It could be a relative.
Yeah.
But it also could be someone who, doesn't like the market, doesn't like real estate, wants to invest in a company and get a certain something in return. And remember, when we're talking about negotiating alternative financing, there's no rules.
Mm-hmm.
If you say to me that you want 51% of my business, well, that's where you stand. You're not going to break on that. You're the investor. The golden rule that he has the gold rules, right?
Right.
So you don't know what you're going to get, but you move on to the next person and do the same presentation. Sometimes you got to do it over and over again. I know people that went to 10, 15 banks before they were financed.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all banks are different, all investors are different, and all relatives are different too.
So you've got your friends and family, you've got your banks. Is there are there other places to get money?
Yes, there are, depending on the part of a town that you live in, there may be some economic development and incentive money, or a loan pool, or some local government funded improvements that they will help you finance. And then there are also all kinds of different lenders. You have angels, of course, who are looking for a return on their investment. And you have other people who are what we might refer to as hard money lenders, who will give you the money, but it's going to be at a much higher rate because of the risk they think is involved.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of, you mentioned the E-Myth Revisited. Tell us, what can I read in the meantime? And, I'll certainly call my local SBDC and find out if I can get some consulting help. But what should I be reading? You have any homework for me?
Yeah, there's always homework, Daniel. You would not be able to leave my office without the likelihood of you having to do a business plan or a baby business plan just to start.
Uh-huh.
Frequently, I will take those 10 points that I referred to, and I have them in a outline and presentation defining what each of those areas are. And I have them start by answering those 10 questions, and I want a paragraph on each one of those. And if they pass that test, then I take them to the next, which is I give them a template and I show them a website that has about 450 completed business plans in a wide array of trades and businesses. And they'll put something together there, and then I have a graduate student critique it. And all this for no cost, by the way.
Yeah.
And then there's another meeting where we talk about whether this is truly feasible or not. And then I would point them, if it looks like it is doable, and I understand where they are financially with the business. Maybe they can self-fund it themselves. Maybe they need a little help. Maybe the credit's really great and I can send them to a bank. That would depend, but we can always point them to some money sources.
Well, I think in the end, most people that go out on their own and start their own business, I was speaking at a women's conference this last year, and I talked about a lot of things, but the one word that stuck in their brain, and they all talked about it the rest of the time, was freedom. There is the idea that it's hard work and it's grueling, and maybe you don't even make as much when you work for somebody else, but this idea of being free to do what you decide rather than having somebody else telling you what to decide. And I have owned my own business now for a number of years, and it is exciting, and I love to have the impact that I have, and I love being in business for myself. I'd have a very hard time going back and working for somebody else, but in the end, having that joy and the freedom of building something out of nothing and making a difference for other people, I love that, and I know a lot of people do. Now, tell us, how do we get hold of the SBDC? What do we do next?
Well, I can practically guarantee you that wherever anybody is watching this video, there is an SBDC in that area. Remember, it stands for Small Business Development Center. There are a lot of other consultants and things that have the same alphabetized letters rearranged. You want to go to a Small Business Development Center. And they're usually aligned with or on a campus of a college or a university. And so you can simply look them up. You can use Google if you want to. Reach out to them. You'll probably get their front desk. The people at the front desk are very smart. And once you give them a little outline of what you're looking for, they're going to send you to the appropriate consultant who will help you out.
Well, Kevin, I'm so thankful that you came on the show and talked to us today about this. I've had the good fortune of traveling around and meeting with a lot of SBDC consultants. I've looked at what they do. I've gone and met with some of their clients, and it is wonderful. You talk about having an impact. The people who work at the SBDC, they really have their hearts and minds in the right place, and their goal is to help you be successful with whatever it is that you're trying to do. And we're so lucky to have them. The SBDC is funded from the SBA, and so it's actually your tax dollars, but they end up having a return on investment that is fantastic. In other words, they build business or help build businesses, and they help so many people. There are a lot of people that have jobs because of the work that you do. Thank you for being here, and thank you. And as I tell you every time, if there's anything I can personally do to help you out, please give me a call or write to me on this email address. I would love to help you, and best of luck with whatever it is you choose to do for your future. Thank you.